Hi, I'm Joe.
And I'm Dave.
And we're the hosts of the Chasing Tomorrow podcast, where we bring you stories that delve into the science and spirit behind intriguing people doing extraordinary things.
On this week's Chasing Tomorrow podcast, it's episode 18. We are talking to retired Navy SEAL, Rorke Denver. Now, me and Joe, we like to think that we're pretty tough. And we're ultramarathoners. We like doing hard things. I've always said, the Navy SEALs, that's the epitome of tough. They do it day to day. We do it in sneakers on occasion. And so I am super stoked about having Rorke Denver on the call today. He's been awarded the Bronze Star for Valor action during combat. He was an All-American lacrosse player, and he's an author of two books. The most recent book is Worth Dying For, A Navy SEAL's Call to a Nation. Rorke, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
So Rorke, I think it's always good, even though I've always sort of been a fan of the Navy SEALs, right? But for a long, long time, it was a relatively, anonymous profession. And you guys did the same thing from day one of Navy SEALs through today. But, over the past, 5, maybe 10 years, at least in the retired SEALs and even active, it's gotten much more press. And so maybe a little bit of background. Let's go back in history a little bit, how you went school, became an athlete, certainly performing up at that level of All-American is fantastic. And then your journey into SEALs, and then what made it work for you? And tell us a little bit, then we'll talk a little later on how come it became sort of more public than it used to be.
Sure. I grew up in the Bay Area, California. This was at a time where it was just normal. I mean, there were like apricot orchards and it was a normal place to grow up. I mean, middle, upper class, easy place to be, beautiful weather. Nobody had any idea they were building all the computers, all the tech, the explosion that would take place in that valley to the point where now it's like playing with Monopoly money. I mean, if you haven't sold a .com, you're not living in the town I grew up in, and it was a normal town when I grew up there. But it was a great place to grow up. It was hugely a tremendous amount of intellectual horsepower and kind of energy just in that valley. I'm the son of a pretty high impact trial lawyer and very disciplined, focused, regimented father, and then a very artistic kind of freewheeling mother that really sort of taught my brother and I that anything's possible and go get adventures and don't be scared to kind of chase your dreams. And athletics was the place I had my greatest grounding, certainly as a young person. I was just, kind of your probably before ADHD and that stuff had been, coined a term. I imagine I had it in spades. I don't think it's, plagued me in many ways, but I wanted to be outside. I wanted to be fishing and playing rough and competing on whatever sport the season offered. And I really didn't feel comfortable in the four walls of a classroom. And it wasn't for intellectual capacity. It just didn't interest me. And so I love to read. I've always been a voracious reader. My dad kind of planted that seed in both my brother and I, and that's just been a gift of gifts throughout my life and something I'm trying to do with my kiddos. But I played every sport you could really play, I guess, in California. And I really distinguished myself in water polo, so in aquatics. And I thought for sure I was going to play that in college and was getting recruited by big schools and was on the under 17, national development team and was definitely going that route. And then my sophomore year of high school, I came out of an English class. There's a little card that said they were starting a lacrosse program. And my dad and mom had both gone to Syracuse, as had my grandfather in upstate kind of central New York. And so I knew the game and I really had always wanted to play it. And it just kind of took off. I had a very instant take with the game. I was big enough and physical enough and fast enough to kind of play at the elite level. I went back to a camp at Syracuse. The coach saw me there and said, look, you're probably a little behind some of our recruits, but you can certainly play at this elite level, and we'd love to have you. And it was unbelievable. One of the reasons I was really gravitated towards that program was my coach. Roy Simmons Jr. is one of the greatest college coach probably in any sport. His winning record is unheard of, and much more than that, He is a motivator and a mentor and inspires people, and really is just a gifted orator and kind of thinker. And so I really just connected with him. And I don't remember him teaching anything about the game of lacrosse. I remember teaching us to hate mediocrity, to be proud of the jersey we wore, and that we only had that for a small period of time, and we could either distinguish it or not, to take care of each other on the field, to give everything we had, to fight harder in the fourth quarter than you fought in the first quarter. I mean, all the good stuff in life was the stuff he liked talking about. So it was an easy choice. And then when I got there, it was a gift. We won the national championship my first year I was there, and then we won it again my junior year. We were in the hunt every single year. I was a captain and All-American my senior year. And my senior year, I had absolutely no idea what I wanted to do, leaving college. I was about to exit with a fine arts degree, so music, literature, art and architecture were things I'd studied. I had basically no potential of getting a job, although I enjoyed my studies. And my dad sent me a copy of Winston Churchill's My Early Life, which is an autobiography the great British statesman wrote very late in his life. And there are just unbelievable parallels kind of between his life and some of the things he experienced and the things that I felt like I'd experienced both in and out of the classroom, and the desires I had, I guess, for adventure out in the world. And so that book was like a lightning bolt that military service would be the place for me to cut my teeth. And so I figured if I was going to serve, I wanted to be an officer. And if I was going to do it, I'd try and get with the most elite unit I could find. I researched them all, found out about 80% of the people that start SEAL training don't see the finish line. That sound like my kind of odds. And boom, I got a spot there, and did a 20-year career. I did 13 active duty years. I did 7 years in the reserves. Everything from running assault teams in Iraq, Afghanistan, East and West Africa, and then finishing my career running the training for SEALs, so overseeing both the basic and the advanced levels of training. And then kind of at the end of that window of time, it'll bridge into a little what you asked me, Joe, is the recruiting efforts within our organization were at a little bit of a depression. They were dipping a little bit. We had, frankly, more people getting out than were coming in. The multiple fronts of the wars were creating just an unbelievable demand for the guys with our talent and skill set and ability to solve problems on the battlefield. And we saw problems. So the community looked at solutions, and we figured we couldn't lower the bar of entry, couldn't lower the standard of what it would take to become a SEAL. Maybe there's work we could do on the front end to market and get more people to the front door. That was the concept. And so I was at the training center. This film crew came in to make a feature film. We thought this thing was going to go to the bottom of like a Walmart DVD, and never would it see the light of day. Next thing you know, it becomes the #1 movie in America, and it has tremendous success at the box office. I had already gone back to grad school there in San Diego in business, and was kind of thinking about what was next. I'd really turned over every stone in my time in the military, so I was ready to be around my bride, my family, and start a family and all that good stuff. So I was kind of ready for an exit, and that movie kicked open some doors. So I kind of got on the speaking circuit. I wrote my first book, Damn Few, which was a bestseller very early in the kind of SEAL book world. And it's really created an unbelievable path out of active duty and into a neat place where I get to mentor and counsel and coach executives, teams, high-performing cultures, and things like that, which is all stuff I really enjoy. I'd say when it comes to the shine or the light that's on the SEALs, there's good and bad with it. I think there's the good part is we have solved that problem. We have young lions lining up, fighting and competing to get into the program, and that was the goal. And then I also think there's a level of the kind of quiet professional and the historic somewhat DNA of the program that's maybe been given away in some part. And I try and be careful about how I make sure I hold myself to a higher standard than the community, wants you to do it. So my books are much more about what I learned, the great men I served with, not a lot of chest pounding about me or what I accomplished. And that's what I tried to do in those. And I do think our experience around the world geopolitically on the battlefield in these tough areas, if you completely circled the wagons and said nothing, it'd be this treasure trove of kind of cultural awareness and understanding that wouldn't be accessed by certainly a senator or a politician on their, combat heavy deployments they love talking about when they visit Afghanistan, behind plexiglass armor and never actually seeing a fight. But I think a lot of that has to do with the SEALs kind of thrust in the public eye. And then some of it was uncontrolled. I mean, we rescued Captain Phillips out on the Indian Ocean. That made national news. It's one of the first, like a month or two after Obama takes his seat as the president. And then, when we did the operation to take down Osama bin Laden, obviously that was on his watch, and he kind of highlighted, look, what these SEALs are capable of doing is otherworldly, and they did such a great job. And I think it just accelerated to a high level. So I think there's good and bad with both, and I try and be very circumspect about it.
Yeah, and that's, you touched on something, and it was really just kind of what you've learned as a SEAL, and I think that's where most people are extremely curious. And so let's just jump right into that. Maybe we can kind of follow along that with a bit of a timeline, because I'm sure what you learned at the beginning is very different than what you learned mid your SEAL career, and then even now looking back at it, because of course history is 2020. So when you first were recruited and jumped into your very first week of SEAL training, what were some of the big highlights? What did you learn away?
Yeah, the thing I figured right away, or at least was a tremendous comfort and excitement for me, is when I showed up, I recognized that the intensity level, that the commitment level it would take to get to the finish line was exactly what I was looking for. That the attrition rate at that high level was kind of the peer group I wanted to find. I'd even at the Division I level in college had kind of wondered why I was the only one sprinting hard on every sprint. And there's multi-time All-Americans that had far more distinguished careers than I did, but they didn't outwork me in practice, and that's the only part I could control. And so when I got to a place where not everybody had the same output, but you could tell only the people with the max output would see the finish line, I was very attracted to that. It felt like I'd kind of found the peer group that I wanted to be around. The discipline, the rigor, the focus, the kind of simple schedule is something that appealed to me hugely. I'm a super disciplined person. I'm not a particularly organized person. So I find in my post-military life, I have to be far more regimented and scheduled than I think I realized I needed to be, because the military was just there. You get up at this time of day, you drag a razor across your face, you get a shower, you get a workout, here's our training, and this is what we're doing. And that actually appealed to me greatly, on top of the tremendous purpose that is connected to that job. So I'd say early on, my experience was very much feeling like I found a home. And then the thing I love what we do in the military, and this is all the military, whether you're at the most elite force or the most non-elite force, which there isn't really such a thing. I mean, everybody that's serving is doing such an incredible job, for their country in their job, that I don't see tremendous differences. I just see differences in, potential, I guess, outcomes and maybe influence on the battlefield. But we really do the basics very, very well. And every high-performing organization or individual I've ever seen does the basics well. They don't jump steps to some level of excellence and high-end performance that outgames doing the basics well. I mean, I think, people watch the great teams that have ever competed and dominated a sport. It's rare that they usually have some exceptional people, but those people do everything by the numbers very, very well. And then that offers them an opportunity to get creative and do other things. And I think that's really the DNA of the SEAL teams, is we learn to do the basics better than anybody else: move, shoot, and communicate. We do those three things exceptionally well. And then when you can master those three things, then you can start getting creative. And so that was probably my mid-career, mid-combat experience, that we kind of, look, the work we did worked. We got on the battlefield and were able to metabolize, digest, and quickly react to an ever-changing and dynamic space, and do so creatively and quickly at the speed of war, which doesn't offer a lot of grace. And so that was a great part. And then the end of my career, I guess, timeline wise, when I started running training, it was just really fascinating to be on the other side of the fence, to watch those young lions crash against the program and see who would make it through, and what traits worked and didn't, and what behaviors led towards success and what didn't. And then just really being in a neat space. When I went through training, it was so long since Vietnam and major combat engagements that none of the instructor staff had really combat experience, even though they're teaching us the skills of war. when I ran the program, every single one of my instructors, silver stars, bronze stars, purple hearts, multiple combat action missions. I mean, when one of those guys tells a young lion, hey, we recommend you do this, you could tell they're like, sounds good, because that clearly worked on the battlefield. I'm gonna do that. So it was a great progression. I really enjoyed, all the learning, and as you guys know, when you get to the elite level of anything, you kind of just realize how little you know. It's like once you master something or get to some level, you feel like a beginner, which is a neat part of mastery and pursuit of excellence. So, the young folks taught me as much as I think I taught them, and it was just a great experience. Yeah.
It's funny. You remind me when I was, before I was an ultra runner, I was this ultra cyclist, we'll call it. And for 3 years in a row, I rode 15,000 miles, which is a lot. And then at the end of that, I said to Anthea, I actually think that I'd ride a bike. She looked at me like, what? Like,
Yeah.
How could you say that now? Like, yeah, I kind of felt like it was part of me more than it was at any point. It does take more time, and that means you're just starting. One thing I want to unpack a little, Rorke, is so there's this dynamic, and we could pick SEALs, ultra running, any of these things. That there's the people who are sort of oriented in that direction naturally, look like you were, from whether it was the upbringing or some other factor that made you sort of interested in hard stuff. And
Yes.
then there's a lot of other people who are sort of interested but don't know sort of how to get into it, don't really see a pathway there. And you made a comment that said, you start to see some of the characteristics that make some people more successful than not. So the question is, one is, if you find the characteristics and you can leverage those in how much is, we'll call it innate, and how much of it is learned?
Yeah.
And because I think it could apply to any of our listeners, whether you're a SEAL, ultra runner, or anything else.
Yeah, I mean, when anybody asks me about leadership, it's all equated a little bit to that, where somebody says, "Do you think leaders are born or are they made?"
Yep.
It's not a cop out when I say it is. I truly believe it's both. I think there are natural, instincts, behaviors, probably some X factor of charisma or something circling around that concept that you probably have with you from the time you're born, or your mentors and the things that you emulated, by the time you get to that position, you have in spades. And I think that goes a long, long way. And I think without that, it's more of an uphill battle. But then coupled with that, you have to pay attention and learn and discipline yourself in the skills of leadership, or in the skills of high performance, or those things that will lend towards a capacity for knowledge, excellence, acquiring new skills, and watering that path as you go through it. So I think it's both. I mean, I think anyone that doesn't feel like they're a leader should not be discouraged that they can't be. And anybody that's a natural leader and thinks it's a walk in the park should probably make sure they're looking in a mirror and do some extra work and effort to pursue those things that will only make them better. So I really do think it's both. One thing I see in all leaders that are successful is, frankly, a desire, or at least a comfort with suffering. And ultra running, you would know this well. If you did not enjoy the suck and hurting and things being miserable over a longer period of time than probably you even trained for, you're not going to be long for that hobby or that pursuit. And so I think it goes the same in leadership. Leadership can be isolating. It can be unbelievably, challenging, and push you into corners and places where, you feel like you're falling apart. You feel like you're failing those you lead. You feel like you're failing yourself. You have to always look at that. You have to pay attention to kind of a pulse check on where you are, and just be comfortable with failure and stacking those up, hopefully in a positive way, to work towards your next success. Mm-hmm. So I think the desire to suffer, or at least the ability and maybe just even the discipline to suffer, is huge. And then I also think, just constant learning is one of the true secrets of high performance. And then on the leadership side, really thinking of others. If you realize as a leader, you're a servant and you work for the people you technically are in charge of, you'll knock it out of the park. If that's your baseline, you could do a whole lot of things wrong and it'll still go well. If it's the opposite, if you think the leadership journey is about you and they work for you and that's where it's at, your team's going to fall apart. Or if they don't, it'll only be by the grace of them being willing to suffer you until you leave.
Yeah, no doubt, exactly. So Rorke, I want to go into story time a little bit here. So it's a two-part question. What's the hardest thing you've ever done? And then mentally, how did you get through that?
Yeah. I think the easy one would be SEAL training is the hardest thing I've ever done. I actually don't think that's the answer though, because as I said, I found a home, and when I was there, I had almost nothing but fun. I mean, when the guys that make it through, you can tell all of them are like, you could have doubled this thing and I would have made it. This is what I want to do. There's no barrier that could you would put in between me and that goal that I wouldn't achieve. I'd say being a parent is hands down the toughest thing I've ever faced, and I'm still plenty early in that job. I think, as a leader, I've led so many people through intense environments up into, teammates that didn't come home from the battlefield and having to, sit in those memorials and see their family and know that, they paid the ultimate price in that pursuit of what we did. And we understand that's the ask, to have that be, your child and your blood, and to know that suffering is something my girls need to experience, and working hard and grinding and failing is something that I know will make them, great women and great humans, is probably the most challenging thing I've ever seen, because it's totally counterintuitive to want to swoop in and help them with this and, take care of this pain and give them the shortcut. But that struggle is where the lessons lie, and what they need to, become their own best version of themselves. And so I guess the thing I learned or trying to apply to it is all the things I've known that work in the harshest of all environments will work for them as well, hopefully with less intensity. I kind of, when I say prayers at night for my daughters, it's for life to be just hard enough to make them tough and capable and resilient, but not so hard that it breaks them. And there's some fine line there, but that's by far the hardest thing I've done. And it's one that, I really try, and as I was talking about just a little while ago, the idea of a leader that thinks they have it together, to keep watering that and keep looking at how you're doing things. And I've gone through a real transition point. I have two girls, they're 9 and 11, and I'm at a point where I realize I actually am better served. I thought some level of regiment and hardness was the right thing I could offer them, both from kind of a manly perspective and a fatherly perspective. And I will still give that. I can't undo that, probably out of my DNA and my personality. But I've taken to softening a little bit more. I realize there's times, particularly with my eldest, who she's a lot like me and is very stubborn and will stand up to me. And I realize I get frustrated, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is exactly what I want out of you. I want you to stand up to strong people and be willing to have a voice. And so for me, I'm like, all right, I gotta let that happen. And so I'm learning as we speak.
Yeah, I always like thinking about independence, autonomy, and a sense of belonging.
Yes.
If you provide those three to anyone in the community that you're part of, you've served them well.
Yes.
Independence is, being able to operate on your own, autonomy, decide for yourself, and then sense of belonging, be part of something.
Yes.
And we often fight most of the first two because you feel like you lose control.
Yeah.
I think there's a connectedness to the SEALs, or what always attracted me to the ultra community was this sort of both confidence in who you're with and celebration for others. That is sort of the inspiring element of it. And so as you went through the SEALs, so you made it through the training, and then you're out on the battlefield, and then you come back off. How do you continue to replicate, that kind of, it's probably hard to ever feel that level of,
yes,
energy, we'll call it broadly. And so it could be a little bit of a slowdown, a downer, as some might say. Yeah. How have you worked through that?
Yeah, I would say I don't think I did it well at first. I was busy enough with speaking and consulting, and frankly, looking at paychecks that were, a single paycheck was bigger than a couple of my annual paychecks for many years in the military, and that was relatively intoxicating. And so I got to take some trips and, you know, purchase some things that I would have never been able to afford before. And so I enjoyed that, not, you know, egregiously or pushing it to some place where I made horrible choices. But I don't think I recognized as early as maybe I could have that there was a vacuum or a hole in some part of my spirit that was fed by that level of intensity. It's obviously very hard to replicate in your next life. I mean, there's frankly no way, and probably not a healthy way to do it. You know, one for one. That being said, finding hobbies that feed or at least satisfy some of the things I like the most about my last life have been critical. So things like suffering, like, you know, you guys run ultras. I hunt animals in some of the hardest terrain I can find, and I'm applying for hunts every year to where I can go further and farther than most people are willing to go, and suffer through that. And then the highs and lows of the emotion of whether you're able to harvest animal or not harvest animal, you know, get it done, not get it done, all these tactical decisions you make in preparation. It's very similar. You know, I'm looking at weather, I'm looking at maps and pouring over data. I'm making my gear plan, my food plan, and then packing my bag, unpacking it, repacking it again, get ready to go. Then all of a sudden I put a pack on my shoulder and a gun, and I walk off into a place where animals can eat me, and I feel like I'm right at home. So that's been a great pursuit. The combative side I've fed a little bit with, you know, some martial arts training, jiu-jitsu, and doing some of that, where you know, jiu-jitsu is the most humbling thing I've probably ever done, at least on a one-on-one intimate thing, besides being, you know, a spouse, a father, a son, all the high-end stuff that you care about the most. But jiu-jitsu is a magical experience. So I've just recently got back into that pretty heavy, and I'm training with a black belt professor out here where I live, and it's just special. I hurt all the time, which I kind of like. I mean, you know, you go a period of time after doing what the three of us have done, where you like always have a pain or an injury or something nagging, and you kind of realize it sucks. But then when you start getting a little soft and you don't have it, you're like, wait a minute, I actually like when my elbow hurts. So that's come back. And then jiu-jitsu is like an actual superpower. I mean, I think when people look to pursue something on earth, if you look at superheroes in capes, it's pretty hard to get X-ray vision, be able to fly or jump over, you know, buildings in a single bound. Jiu-jitsu is pretty much it. Like, if you do that at a high level, you have a level of mastery against, but for anybody else with that same level of jiu-jitsu mastery, that just lets you walk tall. I hope I can get my daughters into it. They're kind of ready now. But that's been very, very humbling. And I think that humbling, kind of getting, you know, somewhat getting your butt handed to you, is good for you, particularly for people with big egos. And I think I always have been able to keep my ego in check, but that helps a lot, because he can do with me whatever he wants, whenever he wants. Yep.
Yeah. So Rorke, like, you know, a lot of our listeners are, you know, regular guys, you know, trying to, you know, and I think that, you know, for the most part, you know, they look at Navy SEALs as this, you know, relative superhero, and they're 100 steps beyond where they are. But yet, I think that the, you know, general public, all of our listeners are really, you know, looking for a couple little tips here and there of maybe places to start, maybe in their regular lives, of maybe some choices that they can be making, decisions that they're constantly doing every day. Any kind of tricks and tips when you could say, okay, for the average person that wants to just be better, be more disciplined, any little tricks and tips to our average viewers?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about it already, but I'll give a couple of tips on how you can do it so easily, no matter where you live and you know, what you probably have in your basic lay down at home. I think when we do hard things, we're just at our best, and that's where lessons, and we feel the most kind of pride and good reflections and view of ours, is when we're doing hard things. So when we're in hard times, while they're not fun, that's usually where all the growth and the good stuff comes from. When you're in these easy times, nobody ever jumped up and celebrated that. So I think creating challenge and making things hard on yourself is good. And there's super simple ways to dip your toe in the water. And one is going to be, we'll talk about water. But I think whatever time you get up in the morning, get up a little bit earlier. I mean, I don't know, you know, most people don't get up super early. Like I'm a pretty consistent 5 a.m., sometimes a little before that. 5 a.m. is bona fide early. I've got a couple buddies that swear by the 4:15. That strikes me sometimes as silly early, but everybody's body's different. But wherever you get up, if you bump it up by a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour, depending where it is, it's a game changer. One, it takes discipline. It's hard to get up earlier, particularly when you're already in a rhythm of not doing that. And what you'll find is you have no excuses in that hour, right? Like if you do that hour early, you get to fill that with whatever you like. And what I would say is fill it with something good. Fill it with breathing, meditation, reading, prayer, giving thanks, getting a workout in, whatever it might be. I think if you do that with that time, you've given yourself this small block of time that requires discipline and a little bit of, regiment. And then you also get to fill it with something that's probably super positive. And I think a morning routine is hugely important. I've got a mentor by the name of Warren Rustan. I should connect him to you guys. You should have him for a conversation at some point. Guy's in his 70s. He's been hugely successful. He worked for presidents, has built and sold companies, and he's just one of the great human beings I've ever met. Life lessons galore. And he and I are talking a little bit about kind of working on a podcast, doing some of that stuff together. But he has one of the most disciplined morning routines, and I give him full credit. He gets up and uses 30 minutes. He does 10 minutes of reading, 10 minutes of prayer, and 10 minutes of writing every day. And so that's how every day starts. And it's pretty potent when you start thinking about that's how he kind of fires up his system every day of the week. So there's one thing, the morning routine, getting that going and maybe bumping your wake up time. And that's not to say take away from sleep. If you need to go a half hour early to bed, do that. You want to get that good rest. The other thing is when I said dip my toe in the water, I'm sure you guys have done it multiple times if you don't do it all the time. Cold showers is something that came into my life, maybe 3 or 4 years ago. You want to talk about something that's hard to do for the average person. I mean, SEAL training, we immerse ourselves in the most horrific cold water ever. But just in your regular shower, turn it cold and take a 1 minute for the first time or 30 seconds, then build up to get 2, 3 till you're doing your whole shower with cold water. One, it's good for you. I mean, they've like basically written the book on it. You might as well be taking a Motrin as far as an anti-inflammatory. It excites all these heat shock proteins in your system, whether you do that coupled with heat and sauna and all these different things you can go down the rabbit hole on. But it is one of those like very simple, hard things to do. It sounds silly, but most people listening, if they actually do it, if they're not doing it already, are going to get in there and be like, man, that sucks a lot more than I realized. But it's not hard. It's not impossible. And I think that's another one where you're just like, you do that for a while and all of a sudden you've established a discipline of kind of doing something hard and challenging. And I feel like that opens the gateway to other bigger things. And then find some other pursuit that's going to make things hard on you and go after it.
I love it.
Yeah, I love that. I whenever I'm in the shower, I take cold showers on the regular, and
yeah,
it's I find the hardest thing is that lever is right there,
there,
and it's so easy to crank up, and then the comfort comes in. You're like, oh bloody hell, that feels so good, because everybody I know loves a hot shower.
That's right. That's right.
It's one of those that scares people. It's really it's completely irrational because for the amount of time and actually the temperature of the water. It's not like jumping in 40-degree water where you could get hypothermia.
Yes.
We're talking about just a discomfort.
Yeah, it won't hurt you.
In
fact,
it
might help you. Yeah.
Right. And then you're out and you're like, oh, there's not even any memory of it.
Right.
So that is a good one.
Yeah.
So, of course, we know you're not going to talk about battle situations or any of that kind of stuff. We thank you for everything that you did, which is impossible for any of us to imagine. But one of the things that I sort of remember, about reading about SEAL training and then sort of how it translates into the military, but then how it goes into life. And it was this example of, you're asked to keep your barracks perfect, right? Neat and measured, and
yes,
you're brought back there at some point and it's a mess. And the instructor's yelling at you, Rorke, why did you leave this mess? What's the matter with you? We told you to keep this clean. And you didn't leave the mess.
Yep.
It's completely irrational, but depending on how tired you are, you might fight it, or you just go and clean it up and you just say, okay. Then you go to war and you're like, well, that's what war is like. It's never fair. No one's going to sort of apologize for showing up behind you with a gun in your head.
Yes.
And so it's sort of easy to see how that plays out, right? Makes sense. It's getting you set up. Then we hit life, and we get into these situations where stuff is a bit out of our hands sometimes, this pandemic we're living through. If you have any words of wisdom having gone through that process, because you yourself both had to go through it at the first level,
Yes.
second level in war, and now again, any advice you have for people how to deal with completely irrational circumstance and not have it become damaging to the individual so that we can survive to a better day?
Yes. I mean, I think you touched on, I mean, one, I'm lucky because I'm inoculated to it. And those people that have served in the military, and even if you haven't, if you've done things like an ultra, you've done something to where you've, kind of consciously and just committed to being uncomfortable for this big block of time. You've set to the task of doing the work to achieve that, and then hopefully gutted through it and seen that, I mean, not even proverbial, the actual finish line. And therefore, I feel like when you do these hard things, you prep yourself for hard things, right? Like I mean, I could probably list one or two things I think that would be crushing to my soul, and that'd be some, injury to my family or my loved ones or things like that. That would be a crucible I hope to never see, although I'm sure I'll see it at some point. But most of the things that even get thrown at those of us that have done hard things are curveballs that were kind of like, I've done rough before, so I can do rough again. So that's why I always talk to people about kind of the merits of suffering. And when I talk to executives or teams, I'm like, go do hard things, because then when hard things hit, which they will, I mean, you will not avoid it in this game. None of us are getting out of it alive. Then you'll be kind of inoculated and prepared for it. I think the biggest thing just also to think about when hard things hit is, let's say you haven't done a tremendous amount of preparation, a tremendous amount of work of hard things that kind of prepare you for hard things, is recognizing that quitting is never going to work. That won't help you. So you got to at least stay the course when you're in a fight, and then to just believe in yourself. I mean, one of the gifts I'd say of the myriad of things my dad taught me that have been of tremendous value in life, I'm not sure if there's any more. And I remember him, I mean, even to this day, he'll tell me, and told it to my brother and I, to trust ourselves. I mean, he just told us, he said, trust yourself. And there's components of that when I give that suggestion that I'm like, oh shit, I hope I didn't say that to somebody that shouldn't, because they have such bad judgment or such bad background that'll be wrong. I don't even think that applies. I think we have been imbued with characteristics and traits and genetics. I mean, the fact that we're here is just this miracle of whatever your belief are on how we got here as a being. We hung tough and knew what we needed to do to survive. And so here we are. So you got to just kind of have this sense of belief in yourself. And I think it's one of the true superpowers of special operations, not just SEALs, is I feel like most people that do that job have nearly an irrational belief in themselves. And that's one of the reasons they get through training. They're just like, nah, I'm good enough. You guys can't hurt me. I'm going to get through it, and I'm going to see it to the finish line. And even on the battlefield, I had conversation with teammates where I mean, this is not a normal conversation, I think, amongst frat buddies or teammates or friends. But when you actually sit on a rooftop and decide, look, if we're down to our last bullet, are we all in agreement that nobody wants to end up in an orange jumpsuit on a YouTube video captured by the Taliban? Nah, let's just all pull a pin on a grenade, grab our knives, go charge the enemy and finish it off until it's done and move on to our next life. And those are gnarly conversations, but it's also like, this is great. Like, we've all decided what we're going to do. We're just going to fight to the end. And I know nobody's going to quit. So I felt great in every fight I was in because I knew nobody was going to give up. So on a basic level, don't ever give up, trust yourself, and add some hard things in your life, because whether they're there or not, they're going to find you. They're going to find you someday. You might as well prep.
Yeah. Well,
fantastic.
We find our way there. One of the other ones I always think about is the difference between calm and intense. And you can be very calm and be extremely intense. Some people will, say, but you're too calm, Rorke, and we don't want to confuse those two concepts, right? So the part of, I think, what else you learn through the ultras, the hard events, we could say eco challenge or a Navy SEAL, whatever, is that bringing yourself back to center. That the calm it doesn't mean you're not like burning and ready to go or dealing with lots of stuff. That's another practice, right? That's a discipline we have to work on, right? Because when we let the emotion get away from ourselves, what happens, right? Then the rest of our systems aren't working.
100%.
Right?
No, the science is there. I mean, they've done this down to, brain scans and, everything about arousal and the way humans are able to process and function, particularly under duress. And you can't do it when you're losing your head or screaming or not thinking. I mean, I yell on the battlefield because I need you to hear me.
Right.
I've never lost my cool and you would be screaming hysterically. And all you got to do is listen. If you ever watch, Cops, or you listen to audio of a jet pilot or somebody that's in like heavy duress that are trained, they always have a calm, steady voice. Actually, if a cop in a high-speed pursuit is starting to sound like they're getting irrational, you will hear dispatch say, car 4, pull off, car 6, you replace, because that person's not thinking anymore. Mm-hmm. And you just cannot do both. So you're totally right. There's times when I think people, miscalculate the fact that I'm not calm or screaming and yelling, and that has any level of intensity. It doesn't. I know it doesn't work. So you won't see me as a screamer or a freak out person, because I know it does me no good. And, we do high-end medical training. We do all these different things in the military with high stress inoculation. And you can see the people can just stay calm, even in the face of looking at one of their best friends bleeding out on the battlefield. And I saw my guys just like, boom, to the task, became unemotional to do their job well. And that's why that person survived. If they just freaked out and be like, Jimmy's going to die, he probably would have. Yeah. And so, no, it's keeping your head. It's one of the great lines. Keeping your head when all others aren't is one of the true secrets.
Well, Rorke, I want to kind of jump back into something that you said before. You were talking about an irrational belief in yourself, and that really stuck with me, because Joe and I are involved in a sport where it's completely unreasonable. Even next week, and I'm going to ask you another question later on about this, because I've got a Navy SEAL on my show. I'm gonna ask a very selfish question in a while, but the irrational belief in yourself. We have our sport where there's a number of different races, where it's 200-mile races, 100-mile races through really gnarly terrain. What comes to mind a lot of the time is the Barkley Marathons. I don't know if you know of that race.
Yeah, I've heard of it.
It's at Lazarus Lake. And I think that there's only been, correct me if I'm wrong, 16 finishers in the 30 plus years of the race that's been going on. And every year you end up having a handful of people that say, oh yeah, I've got this, no big deal. They have like this incredible irrational belief.
Yes.
In their abilities, in their mental skill set, everything.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe why they step forward. Would you tend to agree?
Oh, I'd agree utterly. I mean, I think, what we tell ourselves, that dialogue that lives up in, that I'm sure the docs know better than I, but some part of your brain, that internal voice. If that voice is somebody that tells you you can do it, you're good enough and strong, it's almost like that old Saturday Night Live skit where the guy looks in the mirror and is, like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and people like me. It's funny, but if you did that every day, you'd probably be significantly better for it. I think that's the difference between people that make it through SEAL training, those that don't. I think when things get hard, and for everyone it is, and much like Joe described, there are plenty of evolutions we run in the military that success is not the goal. You cannot succeed no matter what you do. You might think you can, it will be a failure. And the point is we want to see how people react to it. And I think when I went through that, I know my voice was like, nah, BS, I'm making it, whatever. I'm going to keep plugging, and it's got to end sometime. These guys want to go home and see their ladies as much as I want to be done. It's going to happen sooner or later. Now, there's one week where they actually make that last from Sunday to Friday, and it's pretty rough. But even that, you can kind of get to some finish line. But I think that dialogue is hugely important, and what you can tell yourself. I think there's little you can't convince yourself of. And if you do that, you're definitely going to go a lot farther than you would had you not done that. So I think, why not believe in yourself and say, I can do it? And then, when it comes to that sport, look, a whole bunch of things need to work out. Your fuel, your body. I mean, there's just going to be things that hit you on a certain race or a certain time when you don't have it. We pay attention to that on the battlefield as well. There's days when you're just off, and you have to be aware of that, and then come back and fight harder the next day, take a break, take a rest, and kind of move forward. But that internal dialogue, it's key. And the psychology of it, I think, is so fascinating. I mean, I know Joe likes this stuff, and I'm sure you do as well. I've always found it fascinating. Like, if you pick an exercise, like let's talk about a push-up, just a simple push-up, right? If right now, I know about how many push-ups I can do right now straight. But if I said I'm going to drop down and do 30 push-ups, around 25, I'd start getting tired. If I said right now I'm going to do 50, I'll get tired in the mid 40s.
Right.
And if you compete in sports, you know what I'm talking about. That is some irrational, crazy shit. Because you're like, there's no difference between my body going down to do that. But what I told myself is I put some weird finish line on it. And so, like, on a cellular level, it's like my body's like, all right, well, all we got to do is 50. So 40, we're tired. Or if you're like 30, somewhere at 25. It's so bizarre. And so I think that is almost like the true serum that this stuff is real. Because you could prove that right now. I mean, we could just do it. And I know, I can see you guys nodding. You know what I'm talking about. It's such a strange thing. If I said I was going to do 80, I'd blow through 50 without even thinking about it. So yeah, I think it's potent. It's potent.
Yeah, I think I always like the just one more, which is, I think, the Navy SEAL thing, which is, it's never really done. And, you just do one more. I think, it comes back to, we say irrational confidence. I like to think about this personal commitment concept. I don't know, we could all be committed to a lot. I was taught very early in my life that you take care of yourself first, your family second, your work third, because if you don't take care of yourself, nothing gets taken care of. But what taking care of yourself means is being true to the commitments that you make and being serious about them. And they aren't to be sort of negotiated. So to this push-up thing, I've done a lot of push-ups, and I always do them before I go to bed. And you often have this conversation with yourself that says, well, you can get to bed a little bit sooner. You did them yesterday. You're going to do them tomorrow. You've done a lot for the year. So why would you bother doing it? And I'm like, that's the best argument you can come up with. Like, literally, that's it. Like, go do the stupid push-ups and stop, this dialogue, because it makes no sense. But that is a dialogue that goes on. And I think we have to be willing to accept that dialogue happens. But at the end of the conversation, the only thing that really matters is the commitment we make to ourselves, and then the delivery of that. Because then you can make commitments to everyone else, right? Because you made it, then you're going to be serious about it. It's like, I think that we always say the easiest way to go running tomorrow is to decide today.
Yes.
Not to decide in the morning when you wake up. Oh, it's raining. It's cold. I don't know. I'm busy. I phoned, the email, decide today. So then actually the decision's over. Like, there's not even you're just going, right?
Yeah.
So I think that, and I'm sure you have some of these techniques, but, for our listeners, there are the practices, right, that are differentiating for us all, right?
Sure. Yeah, I just think again, a daily routine, however detailed you want to make it and how it works for your personality, only benefits you. I just feel like every time I have a schedule and I'm set to the task, whether I do that a week out, a month out, or like you said, a day before, I totally agree. I'm not good at setting a schedule kind of day of. I like knowing the next day, all right, this is when my alarm clock's going off. This is what I'm going to hit. Today I got a workout in this morning, very light, because I'm very sore from this last training session I did with this professor, and I train again tonight. So this morning I got kind of a recovery workout in. I got a little bit of food in. I ate a bigger lunch because I'll train hard tonight. And I like training a little bit more empty as far as like huge fueled when I know the duration. And yeah, I mean, I know I'm going to this guy's house tonight. I'm not going to blow off the schedule. And so my girls know that, my bride knows that, and everybody kind of works their way around that schedule. And so I think setting those disciplines, one, is good for yourself. It's good for those around you. Because I think those around you in your sphere tend to kind of be, you rub off on each other one way or the other. And that's one I sure hope rubs off on my kiddos for sure.
So I got to do it, Rorke. I was alluding to it earlier, and I've got to be selfish for a second. I don't have a Navy SEAL on the show all the time, so I got to ask you some advice.
Yeah.
Next weekend, I'm running a race called Big Dog's Backyard, and this year, because of the quarantine and Corona-19, we're going to be having satellite races all over the world. Last year I finished third in the world by running 52 hours, nonstop around Lazarus Lake's backyard. And so, you know, I'll set the stages, and I'll kind of talk to you about this race, and I'm going to be asking your advice for all of our listeners, because really we have a lot of backyard runners who end up watching watching and listening to our program. So what it is it's a 6.7 or 4.18 mile looped course.
Okay.
You have 1 hour to run it in. So Laz rings the bell, and you run a loop of his course. Mm-hmm. And you have 1 hour to do it in. Let's say you finish in 50 minutes, 50 minutes. Now you got 10 minutes to sit down, eat, drink, go to the washroom, do whatever you're going to do.
Yes.
There's a 3-minute warning, 3 whistles, 2-minute warning, 2 whistles, 1-minute warning. And you need to be back in that starting corral again for when the bell rings, and you need to answer that bell. The race will end when there's 1 runner left standing on the course.
Wow.
So it's a last man standing. Last year it was the last woman standing. Maggie ended up winning. A woman won outright all over the world. The further you run, the better the women do, for many reasons.
Yes.
Really, you know, it's an absolute war of attrition. There's a number of things that go on. Number one is everyone looks at one another and thinks, that guy looks way better than I do. I can't beat him. I might as well stop right now. It's everybody says, I never quit. We all quit. We
Right.
just need to quit a little bit later than, you know. And so really, there's 1 person left standing. So everybody else is relatively disappointed.
Yes.
So, you know, back to our question is, from a Navy SEAL's perspective, how would you approach an event like this to get the very best success?
Yes. It's a great question. I don't feel like I get these where I got to think about them as much as I would want to think about this. And I may have a different answer, and with which case I'll email you. I mean, the one thing I'll say is you have multiple verticals within this set of decisions as far as answers concerned. The things I can't answer for you are your fitness, your style, rhythm, pace, and how you want to run that run. But let's say you have that locked in, which I believe is the case based on what you're telling me your places and finishes have been. So you have that part under control. So I'll leave the tactics to, do you go slower and conserve and, take less rest time at the bell, or do you get done faster and take more rest time to get back to the bell? The one thing I would consider doing is I do feel like there is in every fight, and this sounds like a straight up fight, just of a unique and specific kind. There is always that will of the other person that is their will and how they bring their will to the fight. And then no matter how much they try to not do it, the will that will be imparted on them by the other competitors, right? Mm-hmm. And so Jiu-Jitsu is a great example of this. My professor, who's trained me, black belts in Jiu-Jitsu are called professors. This is kind of the nickname for somebody in that position. That's why I'm calling him professor. He has been working with me and will probably continue to work for the next 6 months, utterly on control. No submissions, no joint locks, no chokes. Every once in a while, he'll touch on, hey, I want you to end here, but he won't do it for an actual finish. He wants me to be able to control my opponent in whatever position that is. So if I'm on the ground, this is how I control him. If I'm in a mounted position, that is how I control him. Side mount, north, south, taking their back, all these different positions, which are like a chess match. But he said, if I can get you to the place where your basics, again, this is going back to our fundamentals, but you can basically get these control positions down to such a level of primacy that you will literally start draining the will of your opponent to where the submissions will almost be given to you because they are just tired of being incapacitated. They don't want you on their neck. They don't want you on this dominant position any longer. And he's like, I've won many matches just taking the will of my opponent. And then the solution presented itself. And so I love this concept because you could talk about von Clausewitz and the Spartans and we could talk about all level of stealing someone's will in a fight, and that's where the critical moment was. So I guess if I'm you kind of shooting from the hip, I would think about getting back to the bell first. So I think I would do my run in such a way that I had the time I needed to get the fuel, the recovery, hit the bathroom, whatever it is you do in that time, change your socks, whatever it might be. But I might figure out a way to be the first person to that bell every time. And just so when everybody comes up, they're like, son of a bitch, David is here, obviously ready to go every time, the third bell rings, let alone the second or last. So that'd be one concept I might think of to try and just play games on my competitor. Now I'll give you one counterpoint to that, because you've done this enough that I want you to have at least a little bit of a menu. When I played lacrosse at Syracuse, my coach, Roy Simmons Jr., played at Syracuse for his father, and on his team was the one and only Jim Brown, who is one of the greatest football players of all time.
Yep.
Almost anyone you talk to in that era said he was hands down the toughest, strongest, most dominant running back they'd ever seen, to the point of not even understanding, his human tendencies, the way he did things. But Jim came and talked to us one time, and he's said this on camera before, but every time Jim got hit, he'd go down, he'd get up very, very slowly. He'd get up almost at a point like he was hurt. Just get up super slow. He'd walk back to the huddle slow. Sometimes he'd walk to the sideline slow. And he said, what that offered me was, every once in a while somebody would hit me, I'd never admit it, but would hit me hard enough that would hurt. And since I didn't pop up every time, as a lot of running backs do, I could get up slowly, and there's no way they could know I was hurting. I just cruise over the sideline and be like, holy shit, I'm hurt, and take a couple downs and then come back. But he always did this the same way. So I'll give you the counterpoint is, be the last person to the bell, and then just be like, I don't care. I'm going to be here 2 seconds before it starts and go, and I'm never not going to be here until I'm the last man standing. So I pick one of those two. One of the two extremes would be my choice.
I love that, because as you said that, and I'm sure that you haven't been watching his backyard in years past. Yeah. But there's a really dominant character in the ultra marathon running scene. Her name is Courtney Dauwalter, and that's Courtney's tactic. Is about 3-4 minutes before she has to be there. Yeah. She's on the exact same spot, crouching in kind of in a dominant, interesting position. Yes. Everybody always knew exactly where she was, where to look. Yep. Courtney's there, and Courtney doesn't need the rest. Courtney's waiting. Right. Yes. And so that was definitely a dominant thing that she was doing. I'm certain of that. She's going to be there again this year. I'm sure we're going to see that dominance again.
Yeah, man. Maybe beat her to the spot.
Yeah, exactly. Take her spot.
Yep. I think though that is such an interesting idea though, about taking the will of another person, and it's only in game, right? We're here to help each other and support, and we want people to win. But when we're out to play a game, the rule is, in this one, it's the last person standing. And I think it's just fascinating, because they physically can often even be better than you, but that doesn't sort of matter. And so it is fun to play both sides of the equation, because throughout the whole thing, you're playing both sides all the time, because it's physical and it's mental. And the part that is the hardest work is there is no real end, right? It isn't like your 30 push-up example.
Yes.
You don't know when the end is happening. And so you're all sort of, looking, trying to understand, how many more do I need to do?
You know what it makes me think of? I did this post. I have this thing called my Commander's Coffee. So you can sign up for it on my website. It's once a month. I do a video. I talk about leadership or human performance or culture, just anything I'm thinking about. I did one right at the beginning of Corona, and this may be another thing to kind of put in the back of your mind, Dave, for this race in particular, because it's kind of about that, no finish line type mindset. When I was a junior officer and I was at my first SEAL team on the East Coast, we started running a week-long set of exercises that are called an ORE, an operational readiness exercise. It's basically kind of like a week-long final exam for a tactical assault team before they're going to deploy overseas. Now, this was pre-9/11, so you did all these different skills that you could be called upon to do on the, whatever battlefield might unfold. And it's just war games, and you just keep doing it over and over again. You're always under the watchful eye of the instructors, the commanding officer, the master chief, all the people that are evaluating you as a team. But I remember I'm the second in command of this assault team. The senior guy is running a very complex assault. And my job the first night of this event is both myself and one of my best friends to this day, who's now, a captain in the Navy and very distinguished career. But the two of us are brand new officers, and we get tasked with what's called MAROPS, a maritime operation, where we'll do an over-the-beach operations. This means we're going to take Zodiacs, our little rubber boats that we'd come ashore in to, go onto foreign soil. We're going to come from a certain distance out to sea to shore and then run some type of engagement. So we, the first night, go in with our Zodiacs, and I think we did maybe like a 5-mile transit, offshore 5 miles, at night. We could have been 500 yards off the coast. Nobody would have seen us. We come in 5 miles, we do our hit, we go back. The commanding officer, the senior officer in charge of the team, brings us into his office, the two of us. And he's like, so tell me about the event. And we gave him, fuel consumption, how the assault went, everything of the boys, disposition, so on and so forth. So he said, okay, great. What'd you learn? And, we both kind of scratched our head. We definitely want to dazzle the commanding officer. And we kind of did the same thing. We kind of talked about the high points and the low points. He said, okay, how far out were you when you did your transit? We said 5 miles. He's like, okay, run it again tonight. You got to do it at 20 miles. We said, okay. And so sure enough, we run the exact same profile again. It was just 20 miles. So different amount of fuel and we're done. We get back in, go back in for the debrief, exact same thing. What'd you learn? And now we're like, shoot, we do not know what this guy's looking for because we're not answering it right. He's like, all right, do it again. Do it at 70 miles. And now we're like, oh my goodness. So now we got to get maritime, ribs, like bigger boats to transit us half the distance, then, dump out our Zodiacs, then go this further distance to do the exact same assault ashore. Nothing changed on land. And as we're cleaning our gear and about walking down the hall of the commanding officer's office, I felt like the light bulb came on. I thought I had the answer. I wasn't about to share it because I was like, I got to try and steal the glory from the battlefield right now. So I sit down. My buddy's right next to me. He's like, so what'd you learn? I said, well, sir, I don't know if it's what I learned, but I damn sure know 5 miles is a hell of a lot easier than 70 miles. But when you do 70 miles, it makes everything inside that super easy. And he's like, good, go on now, do helicopter ops starting tonight. That was the lesson. That you extend your time horizon to a place that's almost so silly that everything short of that is easy, right? And I talked about it when it came to COVID, and this was only about 2 months in, or maybe like 3 weeks in. I was like, hey, if you think this thing's going to be over in 2 weeks, 2 months, don't do that. Put it at about 2 years, which I hope is shockingly too long. Yep. But if you frame your mind at 2 years, anything short of that is going to be something worth celebrating. And if you get to 2 years and still going, you could be like, oh God, now I got to bump it 2 more years, But it's this discipline of kind of putting the target so far out of range that everything in between it is super easy to do. It's why our snipers get good at shooting at a mile. You don't really ever have to shoot a bad guy at a mile, although people have done it. But it makes 500 yards like a layup if you can shoot at a mile. So for your race, man, I'd pick however long that thing takes. I'd triple it and just plan to be there till then. And then everybody else's will is going to stop before yours.
Absolutely, no doubt. Absolutely, yeah. That's incredible, and I think that's exactly it, right? Is everybody talks before these things about I'm packing for 100 hours.
Yeah.
And it's never made it 100 hours, but you're if you extend that time horizon, that's incredible advice. I'm going to pass it on to a lot of the ringers.
Awesome, cool.
Well, we we always come to the end of these, and when Dave and I started this idea of chasing tomorrow, it's this sort of interesting concept, right? Because what is tomorrow anyway? And we both believe that the power of the individual, the control we have, the lack of, I always like to tell people, you don't need permission to live a big life. It's up to us.
I love that.
So, you've had just this amazing journey, right? And, it's almost sort of at one level, it's enough. Of course it's not. But what's chasing tomorrow for Rorke Denver? What does the future hold for you?
Yeah, I mean, my hope and actual real desire is to make, the next number of years, whatever they may be, more excitement and more adventure in front of me than is behind me. And I say that with the knowledge of what's behind me. I've done a whole bunch of stuff that I've probably forgotten more, exciting things than a lot of people will stack up. And so for me, it's that constant pursuit of another ridgeline, of another lesson, of another opportunity, of another, goal to achieve. So I think it's just really believing and then driving to the idea that I've got more in front of me than behind me, even at, approaching 50. So that'll be my tomorrow, is to continue to grind.
Yeah. Well, Rorke, kindred spirit, we're there with you again. Thank you for your service, and what you've done for us is amazing. I think we're going to need to get you back on in some period of time and hear about some of those adventures and this advice, because I think, you know, you've uncorked some really good ideas for us. We thank you for that. Wish you well in your journey over the next weeks and months. And thanks for being on.
All right. No, have a good luck on the race, David. Have fun, suffer big, and Joe, we'll see you soon. I appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks
Take
a lot,
care.
Rorke.
All righty. Take it easy.